Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I'm going to be analysing and reviewing the Singapore Grand Prix round 17 of the 2023 Formula 1 World Championship. The Grand Prix has been on the calendar with Marina Bay since the ill-fated 2008 edition, which housed the Crashgate scandal, and has only ever been won by Spaniards, Germans and Brits, the most victories over the years going the way of Sebastian Vettel with 5 to his name, including the last Grand Prix in Singapore back in 2019. As a street circuit, qualifying around Marina Bay is always important, and this year's session was made especially difficult by the damp, dry conditions under which it was held, which I will talk about later in the podcast. It is also known as one of the most arduous races of the year and is always a massive race of attrition. You can listen to the podcast on the streaming platforms of your choice, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube, all linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 76. The first and most polarising piece of news coming into the weekend were the heavy rumours that both Red Bull and Aston Martin had breached the 2021 cost cap. Now, whilst Aston Martin were accused of a minor breach of the $140 million cap, having allegedly overspent by less than 5%, which was implemented for the first time last year, with the goal of increasing the competitive nature of the sport through forcing the big teams to make major changes, Red Bull, one of these behemoth teams which the cost cap was attempting to target, have allegedly splurged more than 5% too much. Christian Horner seemed confident that his team's accounts were in order on Friday, stating that their submission was below the cap. But Mercedes boss Toto Wolff slashed back later that day, calling cap on that analysis, describing this kind of breach as a heavyweight issue, as well as citing that a cost cap breach in 2021 could, and most likely will, have major implications for the seasons to come. However, Toto was conservative when queried on the punishment which in fact should be handed to a team in having majorly breached the cost cap, stating that the FIA will always have the final say over such issues. Red Bull's apparent major breach is especially contentious because the reprimands would, under the regulations, come the way because of these reprimands that would come the way of the team if the rumours are true. Now, for a minor breach, which Aston Martin are accused of having committed, a team could be either publicly reprimanded, the tamest of these punishments, have their cost cap reduced for the following season, be suspended from a free practice or qualifying session, have certain aspects of their testing limited, or, the most extreme, have points deducted from either their drivers' or constructors' championship tally. For a major breach, on the other hand, the options become far more severe, with a 100% exclusion from that year's championship, drivers or constructors on the cards. Therefore, it is within the FIA's right, if Red Bull have exceeded the cap by over 5%, to strip the Drivers' Championship from Max Verstappen, giving Lewis his 8th. This would be quite the turnaround, but I'm very doubtful that the FIA would follow through with this, especially after the immensely controversial ending to last year. I feel like Formula 1 as a whole just wants to put that in the past and let it go. Certainly Lewis Hamilton does. This also means that the 2022 World Championship, which could have been mathematically won by Max Verstappen this weekend, may also be stripped of Red Bull if the amount they exceeded was as egregious as it appears to be. All will be revealed on Wednesday, when the FIA will hand certificates to the team who complied with the rules and will reprimand those who did not accordingly. Until then, it's all just speculation. Now onto McLaren, who are bringing a new livery dubbed Future Mode to both Singapore and Japan, which incorporates hits of neon pink as well as some futuristic imagery to complement the classic papaya orange. This is in celebration of the sport's complete return to Asia after 2 seasons of absence thanks to COVID-19. Alongside, in fact, their tweaked colours, McLaren brought a swathe of upgrades to this weekend as well, with a number of changes to the floor section as well as a reshaped radiator inlet. However, these changes did not seem to translate into an increase in pace, especially in the free practice sessions, as 10th in FP3 with Daniel Ricciardo was the best the team could muster prior to qualifying. On the subject of Daniel, he was not afforded these upgrades this weekend, whilst Lando was, reminding us that Danny Ric will not be with the team next year, and especially as this is the start of a new era in Formula 1, they don't want to be sharing any key secrets with someone heading to the exit lounge, something that the Aussie seemed to have no real issue with. Now, moving on to the team's midfield rivals, Alpine, who made a number of developments of their own with a completely revised floor design, the switch seemingly having had a greater effect on performance than the McLaren changes. Esteban Ocon secured 2 7th places and a 6th on the timing sheets in free practice, whilst his teammate's highest performance was 4th in the final session. Alex Albon returned this weekend after suffering from appendicitis, which ruled him out of the Italian Grand Prix 3 weeks ago, in which his replacement Nick de Vries proved himself as a main contender for an F1 seat in 2023 thanks to a confident 9th place. Alex suffered a very frightening respiratory failure on the Saturday of the Grand Prix weekend, but was out of hospital by Tuesday and managed to recover effectively enough to return for the most difficult race of the year this weekend. He also decided to promote the Tai Wat Sacreo orphanage this weekend with a special helmet designed by the children of the orphanage. Sorry for my botched pronunciation there, by the way. Alex is going to auction the helmet off and send all of the proceeds towards the orphanage itself. If you want to learn more about the orphanage, I would really recommend listening to the interview Alex did on Beyond the Grid, which I will link below, and if you have the funds, place a bid in there. But despite the significant recovery process, Alex was still looking somewhat rusty when he got back out onto the racetrack, as he went off the track at turn 8 in FP3. Next, on to Alfa Romeo, who came somewhat under the cosh on Saturday, as the team was fined €10,000 for not electronically returning the mandatory 1 set of tyres per driver within the 2-hour window after FP1. Alfa Romeo are repeat offenders of this, so were severely dressed down in a hearing prior to the final practice session. However, Alfa Romeo have had some positive news this weekend, as Zhou Guanyu has been confirmed as a driver for them next year, which means that they no longer need to worry about their driver pairing, unlike many of their rivals. The final team I want to talk about prior to quali are Alpha Tauri, who also confirmed one of their drivers prior to this weekend, as Yuki Tsunoda. The team is heavily rumoured to be letting go of Pierre Gasly next year, so that he can escape the Red Bull family to Alpine, and to bring in Nick de Vries. It's difficult to say whether or not Nick will dominate Yuki, but going off his form in Monza, I think he's definitely a special driver who could make waves in the driver market in years to come. Now, finally, for a couple of administrative notices, and F1 announced that it would be holding 6 sprint race weekends over the course of the next season, which doubles the tally of this season, and it was also announced that Sky Sports will be covering Formula 1 until 2029. Now onto a damp Q1, and Verstappen led from Hamilton, but all of the top 3 teams were very much in the mix in this first session. On the other end of the standings were Valtteri Bottas, who was out in Q1 for the third time in 4 races after a dominant start to the season in terms of quali. This is also the first time the Finn has been knocked out in the first round of quali in Singapore. Daniel Ricciardo, who was another shock, quote-unquote, early exit in 17th, but obviously his form is just really not there at the moment, so it's not a massive surprise. But the real kicker was Esteban Ocon, who said that his brakes were just not working on his final flyer, making this only his second early knockout of the season. The back row of the grid was home to the 2 Williams drivers, Alex Albon half a second up on his teammate on his return. Now on to Q2, and as the track was slowly drying, the times ramped up, and Leclerc was fastest, whilst another 5 didn't make the cut. The group in question, George Russell, who was out before Q3 for the first time since Miami, both Aston Martins, as Vettel, the winningest driver at this circuit, was unable to make it to the third stage, Mick Schumacher in 13th, and Zhou Guanyu, who out-qualified his teammate for the third weekend in a row. Finally, to Q3, and it was Charles Leclerc who secured his 9th pole position of the year, as well as his second in a row in Singapore. He was closely followed by Sergio Perez, P2, his best qualifying result at Marina Bay, whilst his Red Bull teammate Max Verstappen could only muster 8th, after he was forced to abort both of his final flying laps, the latter of which for the purpose of post-session fuel scrutineering. Max was fuming at the time though, and for good reason. He was looking on for pole position. Lewis Hamilton took his first top 3 grid position of the season, ahead of Carlos Sainz, who was 4th in quali at the track in which he secured his then best finish in 2017 of P4 as well. Alonso was 6/10 up on midfield rival Norris in 5th, and the 2 Alfa Tauris who made their first double Q3 appearance since Baku were split by another man returning from a qualifying drought, Kevin Magnussen. Now for my driver of the weekend, of qualifying, and it goes to Kevin Magnussen. Haas haven't brought any upgrades this weekend, whilst many of their midfield rivals have. And the fact that K-Mag has managed to get into Q2 for the first time since Austria is exceedingly impressive. Especially when considering this comes off the back of a 3-race Q1 knockout streak for Magnussen. This should be a massive confidence boost for the Dane. Now for my team of qualifying, and it's Alpha Tauri. This qualifying session was insanity, with seemingly every team having one driver running the show whilst the other faltered. But Alpha Tauri produced a rare gem, with their first double Q3 appearance in nearly 4 months. Both drivers have disappointed this year, so this strong qualifying could go a long way to rectifying the situation on paper come season's end. Finally, for my struggle of qualifying, it's Esteban Ocon. There were a number of major contenders for this one, but with the form that Esteban has been in this year, it's really a shock not to see him in the top 10, especially considering the pace he showed in free practice, and the fact that he hasn't been out in Q1 since Imola. This is a disappointing result. Now onto the damp race, and it was Sergio Perez who secured his second victory of the season and the 4th of his career. This victory pushes Checo within 2 points of second place Leclerc, whilst Carlos Sainz moved to only 1 point behind Russell in 3rd place. The rain was bucketing it down until about 15 minutes prior to the scheduled start, so the formation lap was pushed back by about an hour and 5 minutes. When the lights did finally go out at about 9:05 in Singapore, Leclerc was immediately bogged down and passed by Sergio Perez into turn 1. Whilst Lewis Hamilton, who ended the day in 9th, lost out to Carlos Sainz as the pair made contact at turn 2.